Did you hear the one about the Jewish telegram? Start worrying. Details to follow. I didn't say it was a good one, I just asked if you'd heard it. We are, though, a worried people, and given our history, not without good reason. And these are especially worrisome days. I mean these Yamim Noraim, these days of awe. We call them Yamim Noraim, but it can be translated a bit more accurately, not as days of awe, but really as days of fear. Milton Steinberg, the great 20th century rabbi and the author of the book As a Driven Leaf, put it this way: as we sit in the synagogue at the end of one year and the beginning of another, what strange and awful terrors beset us. From day to day, we have been content to live on, unquestioning and unforgiving. But on this day of all days, deep in our hearts lies a haunting challenge. Who knows what the new year will bring? Who knows what strange and awful sorrow may befall us in the 12 months which lie ahead? We are all of us today afraid of life and the hard things it can do to us. We are all afraid, at least sometimes, of losing what we have or not getting what we want, afraid that our families and friends will suffer at the fickle hand of fate. As we welcome this new year of 5780, we can't help but think of some of the ways we become even more afraid in the year that has passed. After the attacks on synagogues in Pittsburgh and Poway, we think differently about our place in this country. We once thought, some of us at least, that antisemitism was slowly, blessedly disappearing. Maybe not throughout the world, but certainly here in the United States. We were wrong. Much has been written about the why of antisemitism, and I recommend two recent publications to you, one by historian Deborah Lipstadt called Antisemitism Here and Now, and another by journalist Barry Weiss entitled How to Fight Antisemitism. They both write about the many forces contributing to the frightening uptick in hatred directed towards Jews in America today and around the world. They call out white nationalists, political leaders from both major parties, those who would cloak their anti-Semitism in their critique of Israel, as well as the virulent Jew hatred found amongst Islamic extremists. But today, I don't want to talk about the whys of anti-Semitism. I want to talk about the hows of anti-Semitism, how we respond to it, how we combat it, and how we transcend it. The great sage Hillel, who lived about 2,000 years ago, asks three famous questions that can help frame our thinking about how we deal with the threats that confront us. Hillel's first question helps us think about how we might respond to anti-Semitism, and he asks, Im ein ani li mili? If I am not for myself, then who will be for me? Hillel understood that we must take care of ourselves. We have to stand up for ourselves. We have to fight for our right to exist, for our God-given dignity. And so the first part of responding to anti-Semitism is being vigilant about our own security. We have to be for ourselves and worry about our own defenses. It's sad, really, that we need armed guards to keep us safe at temple these days. It's not how most of us grew up, but it is, unfortunately, a fact of life. But we also have to protect ourselves emotionally and spiritually as well, because one of the insidious consequences of anti-Semitism is that it can cause us to doubt our own identity. It can lead to self-loathing. In the face of this oldest hatred, some Jews respond by running away from Jewish community and from Jewish life. Indeed, this is one of the very ways that anti-Semites seek to diminish us, one of the outcomes that they're hoping to catalyze. They want you, they want me, they want all of us to walk away from being Jewish. And this would be tragic. It reminds me of the story included in our new Machzor that was first told by Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the land of Israel during a time of terrible oppression at the beginning of the 2nd century of the Common Era. He saw the Roman authorities of that day outlaw the practice of Judaism. He saw the fear in the eyes of his community, and he knew that some of them were wondering if remaining Jewish was worth the risk. And so he taught them how to respond through a parable. A fox approached a river and said to a school of fish that were trying to get away from a fisherman, "I know of another stream across the woods, and there are no fishermen in that stream, and I would gladly carry you there on my back if you would let me." The fish weren't fooled by his clever offer. They told the fox, "If we're in danger here, in the water, which is our home, how much more so would we be in danger on your back, out of the water?" And so it is with us, Rabbi Akiva explained. If we're in danger when we sit and study and learn and practice Torah, how much worse off would we be if we were to abandon Torah? There's no escaping anti-Semitism. And there's no hiding from the truth of our shared destiny. There's no hiding from our very being, our identity, who we are in our kishkas, in our Jewish souls. And no matter our level of observance, no matter our Jewish knowledge, each of us feels this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here tonight. For reasons we might not even be able to explain, we know that we need our tradition, and we know that we need our people. A Jew without Judaism, without Jewish community, is like a fish out of water. How do we combat anti-Semitism? It's one thing to protect ourselves physically and emotionally and spiritually, but how do we defeat this hatred? Part of the answer lies in Hillel's second question, Uchshe'ani le'atzmi ma'ani. If I am for myself alone, Hillel asks, then what am I? And this can be interpreted in a couple of different ways. If all I care about is myself, my own well-being, what kind of person would I be? This question reminds us to protect our moral well-being as well, even as we worry, rightly, for our own community and for our own physical safety. We must never ignore the plight of others. To do so, to turn completely inward, would be to betray the highest values of our tradition. What would we be, morally, ethically, and yes, even Jewishly, if we were to narrow our focus of concern to ourselves alone? But there's another way to understand that second question from Hillel. If I am for myself alone, all alone, without an ally, without a friend, then ma'ani, what good would I be? What can I do? How will I survive? How will I continue to exist? La'atzmi, just by myself. Friends, we Jews make up less than 0.2% of the world population. You heard me correctly, that's 0.2%. Now, here on top of these Santa Monica mountains, in a city where Yom Kippur traffic is actually a thing, we have numbers and we have influence. But know this awful truth. If, God forbid, the world wished to dispose of its Jews, not even the IDF could save us. If we are to survive, if we are to thrive, we cannot do it le'atzmeinu. We can't do it all by ourselves. We need friends and we need allies who will help us. non-Jews around the world who will support our cause, our dignity, our legitimacy as a people, our right to exist. And so part of the way that we have to respond and combat anti-Semitism is by fighting all forms of bigotry. We won't get to a world without Jew hatred if we're willing to tolerate a world of racism, sexism, homophobia, or xenophobia. These hatreds all go together. People who are prejudiced against African Americans, Latinos, or members of the trans community, I've got a newsflash for you, friends, they don't like Jews either. We have to be part of the change that makes taboo all forms of discrimination based on religion, race, nationality, gender, or sexuality. And therefore, this synagogue is a place that looks outward even as we look inward. We partner with all sorts of people and organizations in Los Angeles and beyond because we feel called to help, but also because we understand that we need friends. As individuals, we have to talk to our Gentile friends about the ways in which anti-Semitism affects us. We need to talk to them about BDS and all such efforts to delegitimize Israel. We need to talk to them and convince them to be our allies so that when they hear the casual remark about Jewing someone down, or about how Jews are such good negotiators, or about how Jews are so good with money, or about how Israel is purported to be the most heinous human rights abuser on our planet, they will rise to our defense. And because it would be wrong to ask others to do what we're not willing to do ourselves, we must model this by vigilantly and religiously standing up in the face of bigotry wherever and whenever we see it. We can't tolerate a racist comment, giving it our tacit approval, and then complain that that same person made an anti-Semitic remark. When we hear a racist aside, a sexist joke, a homophobic comment, we need to call it out, no matter where it comes from, whether it's from a political leader, regardless of their party affiliation, a coworker, a friend, a family member. The only way, ultimately, to defeat this particular and insidious form of prejudice is to, together with those who would be our allies, defeat prejudice and bigotry themselves. Now, combating anti-Semitism and more broadly all forms of bigotry is surely a noble and a necessary goal. But it's not a victory that we're going to enjoy in the immediate future. So I want to suggest ways that we can transcend anti-Semitism right now. Transcending it means, first of all, dealing appropriately with the fear associated with it. We certainly do have cause to be afraid. We don't feel as safe or as secure in this country as we did last year at this time, after Pittsburgh, after Poway. So transcending anti-Semitism has to begin with confronting our fears. And one of the greatest texts in our tradition about this is taught by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, the great 18th century Hasidic master. He, like Rabbi Akiva, teaches by using a metaphor. He tells us that each of us in life is required to cross over a very narrow bridge. Da she'ha'adam tzarich la'avor al gesher tsar me'od me'od. The important thing, he continues, is simply not to be afraid at all. V'haklal v'ha'ikar shelo yitpached klal. The way to conquer our fear, Nachman teaches, is not to be afraid. Now, at first blush, this doesn't seem to be all that helpful. The way to conquer our fear is not to be afraid. But a closer examination of the Hebrew that he uses is very suggestive. He uses the word yitpached, which is a reflexive form. And it can mean not just to be afraid, it can mean to make oneself afraid. Or more colloquially, it can mean to freak oneself out. Yes, the world is a very narrow bridge, and we have no choice but to cross it. And sure, there are valid reasons to be afraid, but it's human nature to grant those fears a stronger hold over us than they deserve. It's up to us to afford them no more or less power than they should have in our lives. There are dangers we would be wise to be afraid of, but we cannot and we will not live in fear. We will not freak ourselves out. We will continue to live our lives. And we can do that more effectively when we remember that we are not alone. First of all, there are many, many good-hearted people in the world who demonstrate that they really are our allies. Look at what happened in the wake of the tragic shooting in Pittsburgh. Christian and Muslim clerics rose up in our defense. The Pittsburgh Steelers showed their support. A former defensive lineman for the team, Brett Keisel, a practicing Mormon, served as a pallbearer at the funerals of Cecil and David Rosenthal. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette printed a banner headline across all 4 columns featuring the opening words of the mourner's Kaddish, in Hebrew no less. The paper then won a Pulitzer Prize for their reporting of the Pittsburgh tragedy, and then they donated the prize money to the synagogue to help in its rebuilding. We are not alone. We have friends. We have allies who demonstrate their willingness to stand with us. And we're not alone because we have each other. Just look around this room for a moment. And I want you to imagine all of the other prayer spaces across the world that are filled with members of our Jewish community right now. We are part of Am Yisrael. We might only be 0.2% of the world population, but there are millions of us out there, and we are connected one to the other. Whatever challenges confront us, we will face them biyachad. We will face them together. And together means remembering that though we might disagree about all sorts of matters, what connects us is far more significant than what divides us. We have a shared past, and we have a common future. We mustn't allow today's toxic political environment to divide us as a community. And let me tell you, when I find myself worrying about the existential threats facing our Jewish community today, the deep ruptures and divisions that we are experiencing are amongst the most concerning to me. And so at the dawn of this new year, I want to ask each of us to think about what we can do as individuals to bring more unity to our Jewish community. This is actually something we can all do something about. How can we give one another, those sitting around this room this evening, the benefit of the doubt more often? How can we reach out to one another to build a stronger, more loving, more unified Jewish community? In this new year, let's each dedicate ourselves to talking nicer to one another and to talking nicer about one another. Let's endeavor to disagree with each other more agreeably. Let's remember that we are a family. And then let's try to be the minchiest, most high-functioning family we can possibly be. One of our board members who's here with us this evening, Roya Malamud, who grew up in this synagogue, is working with Rabbi Sari on a project that will help us to model as a community how we can do this. And we'll be letting you know more about that as the year progresses, and we'll be inviting you to be part of those conversations. Here's another thing to remember. Transcending anti-Semitism is not just about managing our fears. This is what some call the Eyes of Judaism, all the things that make us anxious and worried. That's not the way to transcend our Judaism alone. We also have to embrace all the things we love about our tradition, all of the joys of Judaism. And here's how Barry Weiss puts it in her just published book that I mentioned earlier, How to Fight Anti-Semitism. She writes, "There has not been a single moment in Jewish history in which there weren't anti-Semites determined to eradicate Judaism and the Jews. But the Jews did not sustain their magnificent civilization because they were anti-Semites. They sustained it because they knew who they were and they knew why they were. They were lit up not by fires from without, but by fires in their souls. So in this new year, let's fan the fires in our Jewish souls. Let's focus on who we are and why we are by living richer, more meaningful, more committed Jewish lives. We're not just going to swim in the waters of our Judaism so that we can survive. We should play in the waters of Judaism. We should relish those waters. So I want to ask you, each one of you, to do at least one act each week that celebrates your Judaism. And the good news here, folks, is that I'm not talking about things that will make you suffer more. I'm talking about things that will bring more joy to your life. I'm talking about Shabbat dinner with friends, services, coming here and being inspired by the uplifting music, moments of serenity, teachings of our tradition. I want you to dance with us on Simchat Torah. I want you to bring the light to our world on Hanukkah. I want you to raise a glass and make a l'chaim on Purim. I want you to stand up proudly and joyfully with your community. I want you to embrace who you are fully. I want you to celebrate with pride the rich heritage that is our inheritance. I want you to experience the miracle of the rebirth of our people's homeland by traveling with us to Israel. There are so many ways to celebrate who we are and why we are. And in this work of transcending anti-Semitism by managing our fears and embracing our tradition, we'd be wise to remember Hillel's final question of his famous three-part teaching, V'im lo achshav ematai. If not now, then when? Achshav. Achshav, my friends, now. Let's get busy with the work of celebrating our Judaism now, today. We should do it while we still have the chance, while we still have the breath, because as our liturgy on these days reminds us, life is precious and life is unpredictable. It's a central theme of our Unatana Tokef prayer. Who shall live and who shall die? Who shall be troubled and who shall be tranquil? Let's embrace who we are with energy and conviction now, before it's too late. I want to close with a story that might seem to be at odds with my message about celebrating and enjoying our Judaism, but really it isn't. It's about a man named Jerry Rabinowitz. He was a physician. He was described by his patients as the kind of doctor who sent you on your way feeling better in all respects. He was active in his synagogue. He volunteered on Shabbat to be the greeter, welcoming people into the congregation. And he was especially proud to serve as the shofar blower at his temple on the high holy days. He celebrated who he was and why he was. His passion for his Judaism animated his entire life, his work as a doctor and his work as a volunteer in his community, the kind of mensch he was every day. 10 days ago, this past Rosh Hashanah, Jerry wasn't there to sound the shofar at his synagogue. And the reason breaks our hearts. He wasn't there because on October 27th of last year, Jerry and 10 other worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh were murdered. Here's the important thing to remember about Jerry's story, though. He wasn't there to sound the shofar for his community, but the shofar was sounded. A fellow congregant stepped in to take his place. And his community didn't gather at the building where the shooting happened. They're not sure if they'll ever return there to worship. But the community gathered. You bet they gathered. the congregation was together in another location, and they heard the shofar, and they wept for Jerry and the others, and they held each other as they welcomed the new year. They celebrated who and why they are. And we have to remember Jerry's life and the lives of all of our family members who have been victims of the world's oldest hatred, not by how they died, but by how they lived. It's our sacred duty to celebrate what gave their lives meaning, what fueled their passions, what kindled the fires in their Jewish souls. And this is the sound of Jerry's shofar that will echo through the ages, long after the man himself is no more. Here we are. We're gathered once again during these Yamim Noraim, these days of awe, these days of fear. And we know all too well about the hard things that life can do to us. Together, we find strength. And together, we find hope. And together, we will find transcendence. And so I want to ask you, if you feel comfortable doing so, to join hands with the person next to you for a moment. I want to offer a prayer for our community. And I think it might help if we hold on to each other for a second. Im ein ani li mili, dear God, if we're not for ourselves, who will be for us? So help us to be strong, to protect ourselves physically and emotionally and spiritually. But God, if we're only for ourselves, then what are we? Help us to remember that we have friends and we have allies, and give us strength so that we can be here for them as well, so that we can stand up for others when they are targets of hatred. And remind us to be good, supportive friends to one another as well, no matter our disagreements or our differences. V'im lo achshav ematai, dear God, if not now, then when? Inspire us now to celebrate the who and why of our being. Help fan the fires of our passion for Judaism and for our people. This is how we respond. This is how we transcend. This is what we are called to do by our past, by our tradition, and by our future, which we share. Amen.